As we have seen, the first book of Samuel unveils the qualities of David by first presenting Saul, who is anointed king. Saul, as antagonist, also serves as a foil to highlight the virtues of David. Now, God's anger with Saul appears in 1 Samuel 15 because Saul fails to follow God's orders. And when God chastises Saul for his disobedience, Saul defends himself, saying he did as God had asked him. Then Saul directs the blame onto the people who failed to follow instructions. Finally, Saul acknowledges his error and admits, "Because I feared the people and obeyed their voice." Saul comes across as a king who is driven by the voice of the people, a figure who seeks popularity. The problem with seeking popularity is pitting the people against the voice and will of God. The vice that is manifested is fear. Instead of being afraid of God, Saul is afraid of the people. This is the worst thing that can happen to a person who is king, a position of authority and responsibility. Instead of being led by God, Saul, or the person in authority, is directed by the people. We can already see how human nature does not change. What was true during the time of Saul, we can see still happening today, allowing popular consensus to determine one's actions rather than the truth that comes from God. In this context, the strength of David emerges. Saul bends to the will of the people. David seeks, hears, and follows the will of God. And this is precisely David's will, docility to the will of God. David finds his strength in the will of God. David's actions outside of sin, of course, find their source in God. God has chosen the young shepherd, David, and has Samuel anoint him. David, from the tribe of Judah, is chosen as first king of this tribe. Will David act differently from Saul? Namely, will David show obedience to God as king? This is what we will find out. David is anointed king by Samuel, as God had chosen David among Jesse's 8 sons. Once David has been anointed king by Samuel, as God instructs him, where do we encounter David? All of Israel was frightened, including Saul, hearing the voice of a giant Philistine, shielded in armor, shouting for someone among the Israelites to fight him. David, hearing the Philistine cry out, "Give me a man that we may fight together." Although still an adolescent, David offers himself to take on the giant Philistine named Goliath. When Saul hears about David's intentions to attack Goliath, Saul sends for David. David offers his service to Saul as his servant. But Saul questions David on how he expects to defeat a soldier trained and experienced in battle. David's reply shows his complete trust in God. "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." David places his complete trust in God. But his reference to past experiences also suggests that he was protected and saved by God in some extraordinary circumstances. And so he can once again put his complete trust in God. Seeing David's faith, Saul acquiesced to David's desire. David, who was girded in armor in preparation for battle, found he could not go into battle with all the armor that had been placed on him, removing the helmet, the coat of mail, and sword. We have a sense that David does not need this man-made armor because God arms him with his skillful intelligence and his adolescent agility. God arms David with courage above all. David only needed some stones along with his sling, and that was sufficient. We need to remember that because David puts his trust in God, he is simply not afraid. This fearlessness is precisely what gives David strength, but it's only possible because of his absolute trust in God. David tells Goliath, approaching covered in armor to defend himself, that he comes in the name of God, who Goliath has defied. And David continues that God does not save with the sword and spear. Running towards Goliath, David swiftly takes a stone with his sling, takes a shot at Goliath, hitting him on his forehead, and Goliath falls to the ground. David finally kills Goliath without a sword. A sling, a stone, and God's protection bring victory to David. So we discover these two traits of David from the start: his faith in God, and because of this faith, his courage. David is a man without fear. David only fears God. Friends, let me invite you again to pause a bit and ask yourselves, do you have this kind of faith in God like David? If not, have you asked why? Or are you fearful of the many Goliaths surrounding you? Better yet, do you remember those times you felt God has delivered you from something that's hounding and preventing you from moving forward? That time when he provided a way out and allowed you to overcome it? Wasn't this enough to make you trust him more?